Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. We are starting series of lectures on history of English literature, and in our first lecture today we are going to talk about Anglo Saxon age of English literature. That is the very first period in the history of English literature. This period is very important because it lays the foundation of English language and literature. I will explain it in easy words with simple examples so that all of you can understand it well. Viewers, the Anglo-Saxon age began in 5th century, that is 450 AD, when three tribes, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, they came to Britain from northern Europe. Who were Angles? First of all, we were discuss who were Angle. We are not going to discuss this who were the Anglo-Saxon. We are going to discuss the first tribe, that is Angles. The Angles, that is the first tribe, they settled in the east and gave their name to the land. They gave a name to their land, that is Angleland, which later became England. The second tribe, as I told you earlier, that was Saxons. They settled in the south and formed small kingdoms like Wessex, Essex, and Sussex. And the third tribe that was Jutes. They occupied the southeastern part of the island, mainly Kent. Together, these three tribes were called the Anglo Saxons, and they are known as the first Englishmen. They are called as the first Englishmen. The language they spoke was Old English, which became the foundation of English literature. Now we are going to discuss our point number one. What I have explained right now, that was the introduction of Anglo-Saxon English literature. Again, I want to clarify one thing more, that Anglo-Saxon period, that is the first period in the history of English literature. It started in 450 AD, and I discussed three tribes, Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. Now we are going to discuss who were Anglo-Saxons. As I have told earlier, that in the 5th century, three tribes from northern Europe, who were these three tribes? Angles, Saxons, and Jute, they came to Britain. They came to Britain, they defeated the local people and settled there. Later, these tribes together were called Anglo Saxons, and they are known as the first Englishmen. The language they spoke was Old English, which became the base of modern English. So, when we talk about Anglo Saxon age, we are talking about the time when English literature actually began. So, I'm sure that you all have understood who were the Anglo Saxon people and from where did they come. Now we are going to discuss the characteristics of Anglo-Saxon literature. Now, what was the literature of this age like? How was that literature? So, let's begin. We discuss the characteristics of that literature, the literature of Anglo-Saxon. It was it was mostly poetry. Our point number one, that is mostly poetry. First characteristics, that is that it was mostly poetry and it was oral. oral poetry. People did not write it down at first. Instead, they sang or recited poems. Most of the poets, that is unknown, most of the poets were unknown. Number three, there were two main types of poetry. Number one, that is pagan poetry. Number two, that is religious poetry. So, what was pagan poetry at that time? Non-religious poetry. It was non-religious poetry, and it was based on legends and heroes. And what was religious poetry at that time? It was influenced by Christianity, and it was based on Bible stories. Later, some prose writing also started, but poetry was more popular. Now, in our next point, we are going to discuss Anglo Saxon poetry. Pagan poetry, Beowulf. What was pagan poetry? What was Beowulf? Let's discuss. Actually, the Beowulf is a poem. The most famous work of this time, that is Beowulf, the oldest epic poem in English literature. And what about that poem? It is about a brave hero. This poem, Beowulf, is about a hero whose name is Beowulf. Beowulf is the name of the hero. And what he does, he fights against monsters. First, he kills a monster, and the name of the monster is Grendel, and then he kills Grendel's mother. And later on, as old king, he is an old king, he fights a fire-breathing dragon, a dragon, and uh, from the mouth of that dragon, fire was coming. He kills that dragon. But what happens? In the final battle, Beowulf kills the dragon but also dies himself with a wound. So, if we talk about technical aspect of Beowulf, Beowulf shows the values of bravery. It is about the values of bravery, of the loyalty and sacrifice. It also gives us a picture of the life of tribal people in that time. If we discuss literary features of Beowulf, there is use of alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sound, and we can find many examples of alliteration in the poem Beowulf. There is strong rhythm with stresses in the poem, and there is also use of metaphors. For example, instead of saying sea, the poet has called the sea as the Whale Road. So, Whale Road is the metaphor. So, many metaphors have been used by the poet in this poem Beowulf. Now we are going to discuss religious poetry, that is Cadman, and the name of the poet was Cadman and Sinwolf, we can also say Sinwolf. Later Christianity spread in England, so literature also became religious. So we will discuss first Cadman and what he did. Cadman. He was born in 610 and died in 680. He was the first religious poet of England. He wrote a poem, The Hymn of Creation, after seeing a dream where he was told to sing about God. Number two, Sinwolf. He was a poet of ninth century. He was an important poet of that age. He wrote poems like Christ and Juliana, which were full of devotion and Christian teachings. Now, in our next point, we are going to discuss Anglo Saxon prose. Poetry came first, but later prose also appeared. Important prose writers were Venerable Bede. He was born in 673 and died in 735. He is known as the father of English learning. He is called the father of English learning. His famous work is famous prose work is The Ecclesiastical History of English People. Number second, prose writer Alfred the Great. He was born in 848 and died in 901. And he is a king who loved learning. He translated many Latin books into English and started Anglo Saxon Chronicle, which records the history of that time. Number third prose writer of that age, that is Alfred. He was born in 955 and died in 1010. He was a clergyman who wrote religious works in clear and musical prose. We are going to discuss our next point. Why is the Anglo Saxon age important? It is the beginning of English literature. That's why this age is important. Number two, it gives us first poem, and the name of the poem is Beowulf. I have told you a very brief story of Beowulf. It introduces us to the first English poets and prose writers this age, that is Anglo-Saxon age. It reflects the life, society, religion, and values of early English poems. Now, as I told you that this period started in 450, and the question is when did that period end? It ended in 1066 AD with Norman conquest. And in our second lecture, we will discuss Anglo-Norman age, and we will discuss in detail the Norman conquest as well. Now we are going to sum up today's lecture. So, to sum up, the Anglo Saxon age, starting from the 5th century, that is 450, to the Norman conquest, that is in 1066, was the foundation of English literature. It gave us heroic poetry like Beowulf, religious poetry like Cadman's hymn, and early prose from writers like Bede and Alfred the Great. Even though the language of that time, Old English, that is very difficult from modern English, this age is where it all began. Without the Anglo Saxon period, there would be no English literature as we know it today. That's all for today's lecture. I hope you found it clear and easy. If you enjoyed learning about the Anglo-Saxon age, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more lectures on English literature. Thank you for listening. Allah Hafiz.